Hey, what's going on, everybody? BBV Ruff here, bringing you some Terran all-ends for hotkeyit.com. I'm going to be showing you different kinds of all-ends that you can use as a Terran player against Terran, Zerg, and Protoss. This first one is actually against a Protoss player, where I'm going to be using a 2-starport opening by producing a large number of Banshees. What you normally want to do when you're doing any kind of all-in is you want to harass at first, kind of dwindle down the enemy numbers, and then actually commit to the all-in. In this situation, you'll notice that I'm using the Banshees to kind of snipe off probes and some stalkers when they're alone. And by doing this, you're actually killing more economy than what you're losing to try to do this all-in with. So as you notice that later on, once you actually do the all-in, there's actually a chance to kind of kill the opponent early. Most all-ins are going to consist of pulling all of your SCVs or a majority of your SCVs. Sometimes you're going to leave a couple SCVs at home depending on what build you're going to do, what kind of all-in you're going to do. So as you can see here, with this kind of all-in, I leave a good amount of SCVs back at home. That way I can constantly produce Marines to constantly rally while bringing the other SCVs with me to kind of meat shield a little bit while fighting against the Protoss opponent. Now, the thing is, the Protoss opponent here actually set up to counter this build, but because of how strong the build is, you can actually bust in, kind of use those force fields to your advantage, micro those Banshees back and forth, and snipe off units slowly. Also, the Raven is one of the biggest key points when fighting a Protoss player. Whenever you're trying to do an all-in, you're normally going to build at least one Raven. The reason for the Raven is for the point defense drone. The point defense drone is normally to ward off any kind of stalker attacks or any cannon attacks that might go against you. So as you can see here, because I had that Raven, I was able to actually bust into the Protoss base and do a lot of damage. Now, when you're sending when you're doing a build like this where you're going to constantly rally, you notice that your numbers kind of dwindle down. You still want to kind of build at your base and start getting other upgrades such as Stim Pack, because without Stim Pack or any reinforced medevacs in these kind of builds, the opponent will actually win. So because I have medevacs as well, you kind of stop the Banshee production and go straight into Marines. This allows you to kind of get through the enemy base fairly easily. And normally if they were to go Colossus, you'd be able to destroy the Colossus right away with the Banshees and pull your Marines back. But in this situation, since the Protoss didn't do that, you don't need to really worry about getting any more air units. So as you can see, all-ins are very strong against primarily Protoss opponents. In this situation, I'm going to show you a very basic Hellion opening that is used against a Zerg player. And when you normally do Hellion openings, you can kind of transition however you want into it. But a lot of transitions that you normally don't see are kind of like Hellion all-ends, which are very strong against Zerg opponents that don't get a lot of roaches. So as you can see here, depending on how much damage you do to the opponent, actually depends on if you want to commit to the all-in or not. So in this situation, you notice that I am killing off drones, I am killing off Zerglings, and by utilizing this, you're like, okay, well, maybe I can go ahead and do this all in, and it should work. So here, like I said, any kind of all in that you do that doesn't consist of just pure Marines are basically going to be, you're basically going to do some kind of harassment in the beginning. So as you can see, due to all the harassment in the beginning, you can actually pull your workers, pull your Marines, pull the Hellions, and kind of just overwhelm your opponent because of how much damage you've done harassing. So there are multiple kinds of all-ins. There's those that are intentional, and then there's also those that are unintentional. Normally unintentional all-ins are ones where you're actually doing a normal build, but you do so much damage to the opponent that you know that you can just end the game there. Intentional all-ins, you're actually setting up to all-in straight from the start of the game. Basically, you're wanting to all-in and just kind of go for that straight-up quick kill. So for example, this game is actually one of those intentional all-ins where you're going to go in, you're going to try to do some harassment, but then you're not going to expand at all. You're just kind of building up in your own base, and then you're going to do just this massive attack. So here, this build actually consists of blue flame Hellions instead of just standard Hellions like the last game. And when you do your attack, you're actually going to do what is a one-base Thor all-in, which you normally don't see very often, because a lot of Zerg opponents kind of respond easily to this, but it's all very micro-based, and if you bring your SCVs, instead of actually letting your SCVs sponge damage in this scenario, you're setting them all on auto-repair. And by setting them all on auto-repair and having that many Thors, you're going to be able to actually bust into the enemy base and do a lot of damage. As you can see here, all the Mutalisks went down fairly quickly, and all the SCVs are constantly repairing all the vehicle units. So these Thors are just not going to go down. So as you can see, it's fairly easy just to bust right into the enemy base when you have that many SCVs repairing. And normally what happens is, if you still have a large army and the Zerg player or any kind of player just constantly keeps rallying units to you, there's no way that they're going to win by constantly doing that. So these kind of all-ins are very effective, especially on small maps. So this is one of those small maps that used to be in a previous cycle. Another map that this would be effective on is maybe like Metalopolis for Season 7, because Metalopolis can have close air positions, which is very small walk distance. So this kind of all-in also consists of blue flame Hellions, but instead of using Thors, you're using Marauders to do an attack just a little bit quicker than normal. So here you're using the SCVs to kind of sponge damage. But notice that the Zerg player goes a lot of Banelings and Lings. That's why you actually have the blue flame Hellions to kind of micro around and let the Marauders try to tank the damage. So notice that whenever you're doing some kind of all-in, you do have to worry about micro and what units are good against what. So if you're playing against a Zerg opponent who's going to have a lot of Banelings, and you do the Marauder all-in with the Hellions, the Marauder should always be in the front. It's a very small micro tip. So notice here just how strong the all-ins can be if used correctly. So in this scenario, you're actually playing against a Terran opponent. And like I said, all-ins are really good on small maps, you know, 1-1-1s, any kind of SCV all-in, because you can minimize distance from your enemy base. So with this kind of all-in, you're basically just going to kind of trick your enemy by sending a few Marines out, kind of holding the towers. But then you're going to do some kind of all-in by building tons of barracks and pooling your SCVs with Marines. So here the Terran opponent is playing a standard macro game because he thought that maybe I was teching. So as you can see here, by pulling your SCVs and pulling your Marines, you can actually trick opponents by holding those towers, keeping them from getting in your base, and seeing exactly what you're doing. So that's one of the key components to doing any kind of all-in. You want to minimize any scouting information from your opponent. So here, this Marine SCV all-in is very common on the ladder against most Terran opponents. Now, if you're playing against a Terran opponent that tries to go mech right away or with a Reactor Hellion, then this build obviously will not work. But against just about anything else, it all comes down to micro and how well you engage, and if the opponent actually has a bunker up or not. Now, there's another thing too, is usually when your all-ins fail, you can do another all-in right behind it by kind of capitalizing on some more units by using 2 or 3 minutes into the game and not producing any more workers. So as you can see in this situation, the Terran opponent did manage to stop the attack, but then by constantly producing more and more Marines and keeping just a few SCVs on minerals to the point that you can keep constantly producing, you can actually do an all-in after another all-in, as you can see here, which is usually what most opponents do when they do try to do an all-in, because if the all-in fails and you don't try to attempt another all-in behind it, then usually you're going to lose the match. So that's about it for this video, guys. If you're interested in learning more all-ins, just hop on the forum and drop a message. I'll catch you guys later.